All right, off we go. So thank you for joining us on this second week of our Rex Online Farm Planning Program. Welcome to all of you who've been able to join us. Good numbers today, thank you. And to those of you watching the recording too, thank you. So some of you may have paid attention to some of the past webinars that we've had on this topic. Not much really that new under the sun. So if you've watched this before, well, just get a slightly different rendition of what we have done before. I'm going to front end the program today in with a bit of a different tack. However, let's have a look at the primary text for this program. For this part of the program. It's this one here. It's called Holistic Management, a Common Sense Revolution to Restore Our Environment. Now, this is the third edition of this title. The first one was released in 1988 by Alan Savory himself. And then there was another one, I think it was released the first one was called Holistic Resource Management, or HRM, which some people will still call Holistic Management. And then I think it was 1991, might have been a bit later, the second edition was released, and that was called Holistic Management. That second edition and this one bear the closest resemblance. The first edition was quite different. A lot of learning occurred in between that first edition and those that followed. So, and it's always good if someone's of an age where they're able to put these things out and then carry them through over multiple decades and respond to the fact that a lot of users out there are giving them feedback, and then they constructively absorb that feedback into the continued development of a method, then that to me is a really good sign of health, because things do change, situations change, and therefore, as per the topic of today, your context changes. So that's the primary text. I do also recommend people look at the climate layer, or the climate chapter of our book. This will be updated. This was written in itself in 2015, so it's dated. And I'll talk to that in a moment when we look at some other links that we're sort of going. But that said, some of the process that we've got here in terms of how we look to people doing this program and doing it through the lens of the Regrarians platform is that this particular page is pretty current for us, in that it's really important to establish the context of you as an individual, your family, your community, the enterprise that you work with, organization that you work within, and how these relate to the landscapes in which you work. It's important to profile the social, biological, financial risks and opportunities that are about. It's important to ascertain the regulatory frameworks, constraints and opportunities that exist, and also determine the patterns and extremes of biospheric climate, which we discussed last week. And some people have already done some great work on, thank you. In this book as well, or in this chapter, I've assembled, and I'm actually got some more to add to this. I've assembled what I call a list of regenerative design and living principles. They kick off with those of my maternal grandparents, Frank and Betty Dole, the things that they taught me as I grew up, and you may be fortunate to have significant people in your life who pass those sorts of things on to you. I think they're really good to capture, and I've enjoyed recanting those to my cousins and aunts and uncles over time, as part of our memory of those people. But then there's also a whole range of other methodologies that are out there, and texts and people who have created lists of design, or what I would call regenerative design and living principles. And I think that they're really useful. As I mentioned before, for me, it's quite important, and this is reflected in why we developed the Regrarians platform, is it's important to look outside of, one church of thought here. The complexity of all of the issues that we deal with when managing agroecologies is wide and broad, and so to simply stick to one methodology as being your sole toolkit, I think, is placing difficult limits on yourself and on progress going forward. So it's really useful, I think, to look at all of these other principles that are out there. So in terms of how to proceed, well, we think, as we're talking about today, it's important to proceed with holistic context development. Now, in the sense of what I've written here in the book, that's a bit dated. There's been some changes that have gone into that. And so because of our special relationship with the Savory Institute, who I'll discuss further in a moment, they will be updating that to that when we do the next release, or the next edition of that chapter and the hard copy itself. And I'll have a look at their website in a moment. Then we're looking at all of the once, like it says here, now that you understand your context, direct your attention to the biospheric climate and all of those sorts of things. And there's a climate table that we've generated in the book there in section 1.19, and on you go. It might be too that you might want to look at where you are in the world, and this is part of the relationship that you can, part of the leverage that you could exploit in the Regrarians workplace, is that there are a lot of people in a lot of different parts of the world. I think we've got something like 75 countries now represented on the workplace. And so I encourage people to identify where they are according to the Köppen-Geiger climate classification system, which was developed well over 100 years ago and has now been fairly well refined. It's not the most granular system of its type, but it's generally accepted around the world. It's one of those things that it's not perfect, but it's widely accepted as being very useful. And what it is useful for is that if you've got other people in the world who are of a similar climate to you, well, then it might be that they're coming up with, they're growing similar things, they've got similar climate-based issues and so on. So it's useful to reflect on that as a starting point for some sort of dialogue with others. Which, if I look at, we've got quite a few people from Western Australia here in the southwest, which is one of the Mediterranean climates of the world. All right, well, it's classified as a Mediterranean climate and it's got its own peculiarities, but there's quite a lot of dialogue, and there has been for a long time, between people of the southwest of Western Australia, the southeast of South Australia, parts of Victoria, and then some parts of New Zealand, which have, especially around the Coromandel, parts of California, parts of Chile, and then parts of the Mediterranean itself. There's been that dialogue between people for some time, and there's been a dialogue of plants, and they're usually built around, those dialogues are usually built around plants and agroecologies that are similar. So you can do that as well for the tropics. The syntropic agroforestry movement was founded in the wet tropics of the Amazonas province in Brazil, in northern Brazil, and it's then spread out to other wet tropics and then to the dry tropics, and more recently into some of the Mediterranean climates of the world as well. So you will find people who are in analog climates won't be the same. There'll be altitudinal differences, there'll be soil differences, there'll be cultural differences, and so on. But often climate is a place where we start. It's often the case when you have primary producers in a room together, and when they first meet, one of the first things they'll ask each other is, how much rain do you get? I've been in any number of conversations where that's been the icebreaker of the conversation. And that's so that you can immediately get just that question, how much rain do you get on average, or how hot, how cold you are? They're really defining questions about, because people will ask that, get the response, and they go, oh, right, I understand a lot about your context straight away. So it's very useful. Going on from there is looking at point 5 there is getting some legal agreements in place and looking at memorandums of understanding and other types of formal agreements that you might be looking at, because they are framing, they are foundational, they are constitutional, as it were. I'm working through a few of those myself at the moment, working with the Mexican government and the state of Veracruz in Mexico. And then we've got some that are right down at the business to business. We've got lots of arrangements that we've developed over the years. Some of them are not super formal. Some of them are just a few things that we've agreed on a piece of paper and virtually shook hands on, and then some are very formal. So we all have those, and it's important in this layer to start considering those. And considering and how we've looked at this is, how do you actually frame those? So when we're looking at this chapter and these sections, it's not about it's about how do I frame this? What are some of the questions and considerations I might have when it comes to this? And as much as that, have you even thought of it? Because sometimes people get a bit stuck, and then that's part of what we're looking to help people here with this book, is to say, all right, well, have you thought of this? Because you may not have, and that might get you out of a pickle, or get you where you want to go with that, because you may not have done this stuff before. So you might want to look at risk management from that, and that's again something that a lot of people, humans, I think, are always looking at risk. Right now, we're in a period, for example, where people are, I'd say, the risk triggers and the consideration of risk is at a really high level, because people, with the pandemic and decisions around the vaccines that one might take, or the gene therapies that might take, or and so on, there's a huge amount of consideration around that. And then, what sort of future do we navigate with all of that? And then that's just for you, and then you've got to evaluate, well, what's it going to be like if we have vaccine passports, for example? What's that going to be? And I think there's a very high likelihood of that being enforced. And so that needs to now come into the category of risk concern that we might have, and how we're going to navigate all of that going forward. Just this very, very small example of a current risk management concern that some people will have around the enforcement of compliance by regulators. So, and it's for some people, it just does them in. I know plenty of people who are big L liberals. In fact, they're beyond that. They're big L libertarians, and quite a difference between a liberal and a libertarian. But libertarians, and I know quite a few of them, and I've worked with quite a few of them, and we host quite a few of them, really don't want to see much regulation at all. They are extreme on the laissez-faire philosophy of regulation, which is to say that there isn't too much. And then it's clear that a lot of people who come into, I was just doing a planning permit application assessment for someone yesterday, and I forgot about it, but in the farming zone in Victoria, it's a category 3 use, a section 3 use. So the section 1 uses, which when you look at the planning scheme, that's to say that that land use is as of right for that zone, so you don't have to get a planning permit. And then a section 2 use is where that land use requires a permit, and then the section 3 use is prohibited. And one of the prohibited uses of land on the farming zone, the FZ zone in Victoria, is an educational centre. And I thought, I remembered this from years ago. I came up against it because I was trying to work with someone who was trying to set up a land care centre, a land care education centre on a piece of farming land. And guess what? They couldn't do it. I thought, my goodness. Yeah. And that's the sort of thing that does people's heads in. And then once you've got over the emotion of having your head done in, the next thing is to go, okay, well, how do I navigate my way through this? And unfortunately, this is part of the complexity of human social and legal systems. We've created this whole apparatus around us of institutions and legal frameworks and all of the rest of it, and that's all to protect the public and environmental concerns. And a lot of you are going to open that door and going to go, oh dear, I really don't want to go down that road. I think I might just grow some vegetables on my farm and graze a few cows, and not too many cows, because if I have too many chickens, then I'm going to be subject to all sorts of legal encumbrances. So yeah, it's something you need to know. And it's a whole set of rabbit holes, because you've got to understand, if you want to do something new on a piece of land, then it's part of the deal that you're going to have to understand the regulatory frameworks that you have to abide by, and it's up to you as well. And I've certainly put this forward from the perspective of people like front runners, you might say, mavericks, such as Mike Callicrate, for example, in the US, who are actively using a process by which they mediate, understand, mediate, and then litigate. So they actually litigate in order to be able to change regulation. That takes an enormous amount of effort and a financial base that's going to be able to support that. Not everyone's up for it. You've got to have the stomach for that as well, because changing the orthodoxy, good luck. All right, moving on from that. In the appendices of the climate chapter, we've also got the Regrarians checklist, but don't worry about that too much, because we've got the latest version here for you. We don't have to go back to 2015, because again, that's been changed. So what I wanted to talk about now was, let's have a look at some of these links. So I'm just going to, I had this at the end of the presentation, but I thought I might front end for this one, because these are really, really solid links, and ones that I'd like to sort of frame our discussion with today as much as anything. So let's have a look at some of the resources that are out there. So now you may not know this, and I'm still getting my head around this, but within the Regrarians workplace, there is this function called the knowledge library. And like I said, I've not got my head completely around how it works, but we are the host, as some of you will know. We're the host for a number of other organizations. So for those of you who don't know, we created this offering to a number of allied organizations to be able to use the Regrarians workplace as their base. and so they are able to run their own courses, form their own groups, have their own liaisons, etc., within the Regrarians workplace at the same time as have access to the Regrarians platform layers and those groups. So we've tried to do that to richen the space and to give more people in the regenerative agriculture or agroecology movement and greater access to a range of different people and programs and so on, all within one space. So part of that has been the work that Sheila Cook and Christopher Cook and Edmund Sutcliffe have done, and in the UK, and they've got an organisation called 3LM. So they are running a whole range of different programs, and they're doing that all through the library here. So I really, if you're really interested in delving in, what I'm saying here is that they've got some very, very well developed programs on holistic management, and some of the best that I've seen anyone. So have a look at that, and maybe after this or in between or whatever, you can have a chat to Edmund or Sheila in particular about 3LM and their offering as per in here. We've also got, and all of you who are planner members watching this will have got access to this program. It's a fantastic program that Georgie has developed and continues to develop, because a lot of people are very interested in doing a higher grade of mapping work, both as professional consultants and extensionalists, etc. And so Georgie's created this quite extraordinary program here where he's built a whole range. Yeah, I have to, Blythe, I know what you're saying there. I'm not completely over how it all works. So we'll have to take that question on notice. And I think I'll ask Georgie. Perhaps we can have, because he knows much more about it than I do. So yeah, I expect that you'll be the same. But anyway, we'll get your understanding of how that works. I should say, just going back for a moment, that I do understand that only members of 3LM have access to this now, because I have sort of overarching admin rights for the Regrarians workplace. I have access to these things, and but you will not. So there's sort of like some you might say some paywalls that are in place that restrict access to viewing some of this stuff. But from the perspective of planner members definitely have access to all of this work that Georgie has put together within the knowledge library. I haven't got my head around how that happens for you. So I'll take that on notice. Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. I'll ask it. Thank you for asking. All right. So let's go to the next part. So the other place, well, there's two other places that I should also put Holistic Management International. I didn't put them in this morning. International. So Holistic Management International also have a range of training programs. There was a split between Holistic Management International and Alan Savory and Jodie Butterfield and a number of other figures within the HM movement in I think around 2009. And that went on to cause those people to go and form the Savory Institute. And the Savory Institute, I would say, I think that the Savory Institute broadly has more sophisticated listing of materials than Holistic Management International in this space. Holistic Management International, that said, still produces some excellent tools. And I think that they, you know, it's kind of like GM and Ford or Toyota. They all produce cars. They're all very decent cars. You might prefer to Ford to a GM. I don't know. You can make up your own mind on that. But they're very similar. They're both cars. I'll just leave it at that. I don't know which is a Toyota. So anyway, Holistic Management International have got a really good suite of e-books available, and in both in English and in Spanish. So for those of you who are Spanish speakers, there's quite a few really good resources there. And these are really simple and easy to follow and so on. There's quite a lot here in this listing as well. So have a look through the listings of both of those and see what information you might want to glean. Bruce Ward was a friend of ours, and I didn't know him for that long, but he was, I knew him only for a few years, but I really enjoyed our friendship, and that with his two sons, David and Andrew. And he died, unfortunately, in September 2012. And he had a really good, he was one of the early adopters of online learning. Seems so ubiquitous now, but he'd been doing it since the mid-noughties and produced an enormous amount of content. And when Bruce died, or soon after Bruce died, his sons both approached me and said, "Well, I'd like to take over his clientele," which I said, "No bloody way. I don't want to have the responsibility of that legacy," because Bruce was he was a giant. So I just, and also I'm not dyed in the wool HM, you might say, whereas he was very, Bruce was a very big HM guy. So HM is part of our practice. It is not our practice, our complete. It's not just what we do. So I didn't see it as being appropriate. Notwithstanding this, they converted this website of Bruce's into a legacy trust. And it's a really, really, really good resource, because even though Bruce died close to a decade ago, and a lot of these materials are much older than that, a lot of what Bruce had to say was extremely incisive and insightful, I should say, and well worth listening to. So if you want to get some good information on holistic management, then that's a really good place to go. Can't recommend that highly enough. Thank you. See that I have 4 items as well in the knowledge library. Okay, so there must be a reason for that. Like I said, I'll have to follow up with Georgie and get him to write a piece in the planner members group, and just to make sure that everyone's clear on how to access those resources. So the other person of interest, or another person of interest, who is a member, an active member of the Agrarians Workplace, is Helen Lewis. Helen and her husband Ian and their children run a property, it's about 3,000 acres in southeastern Queensland, near a town called Warwick. And I've been up there a few times now, and they're lovely people. And Helen has been a really active person in the workspace, working with people to help them understand context. And she's been doing some free workshops on decision making and whatnot. She's a very busy person, as a lot of people are. Helen also is the CEO of the I can't remember, she'll kill me for this, but there's a road project that's going that basically links Western Australia with Queensland and goes through the centre. So I just can't think of it off the top of my head, but she's been behind that, or a key figure in that project, for well over a decade. A really experienced holistic manager, both on the land and also at a personal business level. So I can't recommend enough catching up with Helen. So she's got some workshops on here, but she's also got quite a lot of resources that she's put out there on the workplace. So if we search for, again, give you an indication how to do this, if you're still familiarizing yourself with the Regrarian's workplace, just type in Helen, and she's got a whole lot of stuff on that she's posted on decision making and so on. And she'd be a good person to check in with. Has been really generous with her time with the Regrarian's workplace. So have a crack. Have a chat with Helen. Graham Hand is another prominent member of the Regrarian's workplace, and Graham, I would say, is well, most people in holistic management are not orthodox thinkers, but then there's Graham as well, and he's a very unorthodox thinker, and he often is a provocateur in the movement, in that he throws little grenades in there from time to time to just get people thinking because of his capabilities as a thinker. So he's doing some really, really great work. And what I really love about Graham's work, he's a lovely fellow for a start. He's a very fun person to be around, and a good friend, but also is that if you're interested in, he will challenge you around inputs. He will challenge you around how to make a system as profitable as it can, and that will challenge some of the paradigms that perhaps some of you have got entrenched within you. So if you're prepared to have that challenge, then just go and read, just go and type in, for example, Graham, and read his posts and look at his responses, because they're often very very different to what a lot of other people are going. And I think that that's always useful in the growth of anybody's development, is to not only, you get it within this regenerative agroecology space, and most of the time it's a bit of an echo chamber, and which makes people feel safe to an extent and whatnot. But I think it's important at the same time to have some people both within and outside who are going to challenge you and challenge some of your thoughts and so on. And off we go from there. So have a look at Graham's work. It's really great. Lots of really great results. Step outside of, say, the traditional holistic management space, and you've got people like Javan Banakovic. Javan started off in his adult life as a financial planner. So has a Bachelor of Commerce. He's Canadian from British Columbia. I first met Javan, I think, in about 2013. I did a farm planning short course in Oregon that he came to, and then Javan did the 10-day REX program that we did at the same venue in Oregon in 2016. Javan's a very, very smart guy. Anyone who's been around him would realise that, and extremely widely read. And if you want to catch up, Javan did. I hired him to do some holistic context webinars for us in the first couple of REXs, the 10-week REXs that we held in 2017, 2018. So there's record of some of his work in there if you want to go back to those archives. So his take on this is, so he's calling it life design, holistic life design, and he has come up with a concept called a holistic life context. So a bit of a different take. It brings in, again, some other thinking from outside of the HM movement and so on. And why I'm telling you this is because it's important. Like, every one of you will have a different resonance point with getting this stuff done. And it may not be that you look at this, something like as bland as what I've got here. I mean, to you, that looks like the census form that some of you filled out or filling out at the moment here in Australia. It's a form. Some of you go, oh my God, I don't want to do another bloody form. It feels like homework, right? Some of you might want to use some butcher's paper and elaborate with a mind map or whatever. You see things very visually. So I'm not really good at that kind of thing. So, and understanding that, I'm saying, well, there are people out there who are, and who we have had on board here, and we have had them present different ways of you arriving more or less at the same destination, but in ways that better suit your learning styles and personalities and so on. So that's why I'm putting these things forward, or these different folks forward. So have a look at Javan's work. And again, just type in Javan up here, and you'll get a whole catalogue of his responses and so on that he's working on. Things that he's working on, I should say. Where am I? Another person of interest, and I'd say in some ways, Javan and Dan Palmer are Javan and Dan Palmer are both kind of a similar lineage, in the sense that both of them have come into the land management space, as it were, through permaculture design. So Javan as a financial planner who's interested in ecology, then meets permaculture, then meets holistic management, then develops his own sort of framework around that. Dan Palmer, who's a doctor of philosophy and a professional philosopher, who then gets into permaculture, then does some workshops with myself, and is introduced to holistic management, and then embraces that completely, while still, I'd say, staying true to his permaculture roots, but also honouring his experience as a philosopher. So yeah, Dan's got some really good stuff. He's an excellent communicator, and has done a lot of really great work. So well worth having a look at Dan's work as well. Dan is a member of the Regrarians Workplace. He's not, I wouldn't say he's been that active, but he's certainly a person I would definitely catch up with and see another style and read his work. He's got a really good blog called Making Permaculture Stronger, and it's almost like some of us have sort of, I won't say given up on permaculture, but like for us, it's just another thing that's out there, another system methodology that's out there, and it's sort of, its currency and its development is not really going anywhere. It's not the bright young thing that it once was, and its development as a philosophy practice and whatnot, is, I would say, is stalled, and that's okay, because it's a really great framework, but it is what it is. And Dan's sort of, I suppose, in a way, trying to stop that by making the philosophy, or making the philosophical part of it, I would say, stronger. So he's got a really good blog around that that's worth having a look at if you're interested. Interviewed a lot of different people, and tried to get a lot of that built up. Outside of this space altogether is some of the work of, well, in this case, a relatively controversial figure and some of his colleagues, Jordan Peterson, or Professor Dr. Jordan Peterson from originally from Alberta and in Canada, and now in Ontario and Toronto, and he's developed this methodology, the self-authoring suite, and this links in with the Understand Myself site. So these are some of the sites that are maybe a bit of an alternative to holistic management, kind of helping you to self-determine. As Javan Bernakovich, I think one of his best quotes was, if you are not designing your life, then someone else is. And part of that, particularly when we look at one of the greatest outcomes of liberal thought in the last 300 years, is the identity, is the acceptance that that we are individuals, and we are capable of making decisions for ourselves, and coming full forward to that we are capable and should be encouraged, I believe, to self-determine our futures. Well, that extends to this kind of self-authoring. What's your past authoring, what's your present authoring, and what's the future authoring? You could swap out authoring for sovereignty. You could swap it out for determination, and so on. You could swap it out for context. So I've gone through this program, and I've done it because I was very interested in. I'm always looking, always seeking in my role as a trainer, an educator, and as a person, to see what's out there and not be stuck within familiar silos of that are within one band of thought. So it's been really interesting to go out and have a look at that stuff. So I really encourage anyone to have a look at that, and just have a look, and if it fits for you, we'll then proceed. Similarly, with this allied side of Understand Myself, this is, I think, really good. See, there's a lot of you will have known, a lot of you will have done psychology, or would have done psychology in some way, shape or form at a secondary level or tertiary level. And you'd be familiar with the Briggs-Myers personality assessments and so on. Some of you will have had to have done that, conducted those assessments in order to, as a part of the getting jobs and so on. I know I certainly did. I did one in, well, not to get a job, but I applied in 1994 to become a landscape architect at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, and I got to stage, I think it was 6 of 7 stages, and stage 6 was the personality assessment, and I failed it evidently because I'd passed all the way up to that point and then didn't get past there. And I incidentally spoke to Scott Godfreyson, who is a friend of mine, and he was in the next year's induction. And I said, how did you get past that personality test? And we talked about the questions because they were quite memorable. And he said, oh, well, I spoke to others who had gone before, and I just pretended that I was a voyeur, and I was up myself, and I was able to get in, which I couldn't do. And had questions like, when you walk into a room, do you feel like you're the only, that everyone's looking at you? It's like, no. I mean, who thinks that? Anyway, going right ahead. So these sorts of things are familiar to some of us, and perhaps not to others. And I think it's useful through the lens of trying to give people the opportunity to self-determine, which I think is a really strong thing to do in personal development. But add to that is that it's an opportunity for people to lay on the table what their attributes are, so that as we try and navigate how to work or how to develop better multi-pronged, often multi-layered, multi-generational enterprises that we find ourselves often doing in agriculture or in agroecologies, then it helps to use some of these tools from disciplines outside of the usual suite of disciplines that are included in agricultural enterprises to help us frame who's going to do what and who's best suited to doing particular roles, and understanding why some people really resent being involved in particular jobs that they've been doing for 30 or 40 years. Because they've never actually done any of this self-assessment or had this done with them. I've found this on a number of occasions. I mean, I remember most pointedly Joe Bear, who is from a very famous family in northern Victoria. Got a lagoon, Bear's Lagoon, named after her family up near between Bourton and Kerrang, and on the Loddon River. And her husband, she got married to a gentleman. They then bought in on a farm, on a large number of farms with his brother. So two brothers and two in-laws, right? So when they came, the two brothers, as soon as, and this often happens, as soon as someone gets married, like they start off as brothers and then they become their own units. And if they then become involved in their own enterprises, then they start to strike somewhat of a different path. That is then influenced by their choice of life partner and so on. And, what you're seeing there is a cell of self-determination within a family unit. Each family has its own way of doing things, which is defined by the people who are involved in it. I know, I can speak for my own family in the way that we strike out and I could just say how the reflection of our values and way of going about things is pretty clear to people pretty quickly. The same with this coupling. So Jo and her husband and her brother-in-law and sister-in-law bought all these farms together, and they were finding pretty soon that whilst it sounded all good on paper and it worked, and it all, once they got past the honeymoon period of this engagement, of this business relationship, things started to fall apart a bit, and it started to get pretty noxious. And so they fortunately hired a psychologist, which is not normally what a lot of people would do. Usually they reach for the mediator, but they reached for a psychologist, and some mediators are psychologists, so I understand that. They pulled these people in, and the first thing that they did was put them through personality assessments, and that the purpose of that was so that everyone could have their own identity and characteristics honoured, with the object, therefore, of then going, okay, well, you are better suited to this role or set of roles, you're better suited to this set of roles, and and that's where they pulled it. And that's what they've been doing for the last 20 years, and they've been going along really, really well since. And because they actually went through the adult process of taking responsibility for where they were at as individuals and as family units, took responsibility overall, and then developed strategies to be able to move along. Just as, you see this so often, that family enterprises, particularly family agricultural enterprises, which are dynastic, multi-generational and so on, just a lot of them just don't do the work that you see in organizations, in corporate organizations or otherwise, where a lot of this work is being done continuously and sometimes overly. I think, and some of you who are within organizations would no doubt agree, that some of this stuff just gets a bit bureaucratic, and it's, just doing it for the sake of it, it would appear at times. Watch an episode of Utopia if any of you haven't watched one, and you sort of see what the perverse but unfortunately too real example of that would be in place. So there's a lot that we can learn, I suppose, and this is why I'm putting up these. There's lots of different ways forward so that we don't have to be stuck with what we're dealing with. I was really pleased to have a conversation with someone the other day. I don't know if he's on the call this morning. He's not. And we were talking about, so he's got a farm. He's one of our planner members, and I had a one-on-one with him the other day, and he's got his family. So he's got a brother who lives off. So he's got a farm with his wife. He's got his parents want to move in with him, move on to the farm. He's got a sister who lives outside, and And I said to them, we were talking about how just talking about that in general. And I said, have you actually sat down and talked about how this is all going to work with your siblings when it comes to the pinch point of family succession discussions? And he said, no. I said, all right, because this is the thing. Often when you're at particular points of change, there's something, this is why it's good to talk to people and have conversations outside of your silo, is that sometimes there's weak links that you don't even know exist that are coming. There's risk factors which are coming. So I invited him to catch up with his have a meeting, a Zoom, because they were all over the place in the US. Get a Zoom together and have a family meeting to discuss where you're all at, what the vibe is, with family succession, because his parents were in their 70s. So obviously, once you get to that point of life, then the clock's ticking. It's hard, but it's true. And so there's a different array of decisions which are coming forward, which are better dealt with sooner rather than later, and are better dealt with when people are all alive and compass and well and open than they are when pressures start to mount or clocks start ticking or people's wellness or otherwise or they're gone. So that to me was a really good example of, and I got a positive response. He wrote back to me yesterday to say, oh yeah, we had this meeting, it was really good. We're feeling a lot better about it, but we've still got a lot more to go. But at least we've started the conversation, and we're all feeling better about it. I mean, that's leadership, and you can be a leader, I think, with yourself in terms of that, starting with yourself. But then you can also be a leader in your space, and sometimes that will take some uncomfortable conversations. But guess what? Life is not entirely agreeable all the time. So sometimes you'll have weeds in your garden. Sometimes you'll have weeds in your field. Sometimes you'll have weeds within yourself. So and in your family. So you just got to deal with it. All right, enough proselytizing. I had any more there. So let's move along to, actually, I'll go back to the Prezi. Let's have a look at the holistic. Has anyone got any questions before I proceed too far? Oh, Tisha, I'll just allow you to talk. Unmute.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Going well, thank you.
Welcome. What were you after? What did you want to ask me?
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I accidentally clicked that.
Oh, that's okay. Oh well.
I wonder why he's calling me up.
Because you put your hand up. That's okay.
Yeah, I'll drop that.
No worries.
My bad.
All right, no, that's okay. Well, it's nice to hear your voice and say hello anyway. So everything's all right so far?
It's good. We printed off the climate chapter so I can go through and highlight things as they come through. So yeah, really good. I loved all the dot points at the front. Really enjoyed those. That's my thing, dot points.
Yeah, I'm a dot point. You probably get it. I use dots a lot. Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'll get on with the show. Thank you. All right. If anyone else has got any questions, just let me know and I'll be happy to intervene. All right, so holistic management framework. So there's two that are out there. This, as far as I understand, is the most recent expression of holistic management of an holistic management framework that's out there. It's important, and this is from the Savory Institute, I should say. I think it's useful to look at the other framework that's out there. I've actually contemplated, and I still am, I've just got to find the time to work it through, looking at one that's perhaps in a bit of amalgam and got some of our own and others' thoughts in a framework as well, but I might just reserve that altogether. But in any case, these are the two holistic management frameworks that have been developed since Savory and HMI have split. So there's a lot of similarities between the two, but some subtle differences, and I think they're worth considering. So if we look at the Savory one to start with, which is the one that we run with, it just seems to be a little, I'm not going to say clunky, it just seems to be a bit easier to follow, and seems to me to be a bit more that's in sync with our own, with the outcomes that we've seen to be successful or more successful. But again, that's why I'm putting it up here, is to show that there's some others which may well resonate with you, and to say that if you want to create your own framework or pick and choose, well, that's completely up to you. But anyway, let's start with the Savory Institute one. So we've got the decision makers, and this is reflected in the questions that we've got in our forms. So who are the decision makers? What resource base do you have in terms of all of the assets that you have? And then what sort of money have you got? So that's the whole under management in terms of the people and the land and so on, and the other assets that you might have within that. And then you've got the holistic context, which has changed a little bit over time, because the holistic context used to have statement of purpose, quality of life, forms of production, and future resource base. For reasons which I'm still not completely clear about, the forms of production have been removed, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now. And so from a Savory perspective, it's expected that you will come out with some sort of statement of purpose, that you'll come out with a quality of life statement, and some sort of statement around the future resource base that you want to see. Then we come down to ecosystem processes. This is where you'll look at your system, particularly as relates to the land, but you can also broaden this somewhat, where you're looking at the water cycle. So how is water cycling through your system? So you can start, and I'll expand on this a bit when we get to the geography layer, particularly when we're talking about site analysis. How is it that water interacts with your site right now, on all, whether that's irrigation water, how effective is it, to how effective is raindrops as they fall upon your site right now. So there's that part. Then there's the mineral cycle, which is again similar, although there's a whole bunch of different minerals, and I'd go further than that. Well, there's a whole bunch of minerals, but there's a whole lot of elements which make up which some of those minerals are compounds of, and so which is more common. So how's the nitrogen cycle? Well, nitrogen is not just nitrogen. Obviously, it's made up of, when we look at the nitrogen cycle, we're looking at compounds of nitrogen. When we look at the sulfur cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the carbon cycle, etc., they're all generally not just C or N or S or whatever, or or the potassium K or whatever, they're usually compounds of those elements. But anyway, how are they cycling? And the carbon cycle is one that a lot of people take a lot of interest in. So how is carbon dioxide as one form of carbon, one carbon compound cycling through our system? How are other forms of carbon, like hydrocarbons in the fuels that we use, how are they cycling through, and so on in the overall play? And then you've got community dynamics, which is largely to do with the ecological communities which occupy our space. I woke up this morning, as you do, well, as I do often at around 2 or 3 a.m. Sometimes I'll get up and have a read, but sometimes I'll just lie there in bed. And it's one of those periods, well, at least for me, that I get up and you're sort of half asleep and worry a bit. It's the worrying hours, you might say. I think that might even be what it's called. But my worry this morning was the lack of insects. I've just been listening to everyone carry on about all sorts of things with regards to the pandemic, and I've been reaching back into my Malthusian underpinnings of philosophy and so on, and I started to think terribly about the fact that that insect populations are just tanking badly. And I thought, man, this is just, the pandemic's nothing compared to the cataclysm of the lack of insects in the world, or the declining numbers of insects. Just anyway, so that was my little community dynamics moment at 3 a.m. this morning. Luckily, I got back to sleep. But there'll be a whole range of those. And unfortunately, because of humanity's general poor agricultural management and land management, we've got a lot of these things to deal with. There's a lot of missing pieces. There's a lot of decline. There's a lot of extinction. There's a lot of disharmony when it comes to community dynamics. And that also carries out into social dynamics that we have with others of our species as well. So what are they all about? And then we look at energy flow. So particularly as this is particularly around how the energy from sunlight flows through our system, and what is it resulting in? Because on a lot of systems, some of you are feeling this right now. If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, extreme heat caused by the same sun that I'm really enjoying right today. If this was the middle of summer, I would probably, and it's 45 degrees centigrade, I'd probably not be enjoying the sun that much right at that moment. But today, I'm loving it, and it's the same sun, but we've got a different appreciation of it. So there's a different flow of that energy happening at any given time. And then the conditions that are around you with respect to the ecosystem are going to frame how positive that energy flow is at any given time. So there's that. So then we look at ecosystem management tools. So human creativity is largely what frames a lot of this. So, humans use, there's other organisms which use some tools, but we are beyond a tool maker. I mean, we are superlative when it comes to that. We just can't think of how to do something without putting some technology in front of that. We can't, breaking a stick over. There's some people who would, even though that stick could be broken over their leg, over their knee, they would still use a hatchet, because that's what you do when you're a human, right? And on it goes from there. So it's human creativity that creates technology. It's human creativity that determines, and creativity is not just a positive thing, it's also a negative. There's I would say it's human expression, as much as creativity is a nice word, but there's expressions out there of technologies which are less than ideal, I would say, but that's subjective. Just as there's expressions of fire which are positive. There's expressions of rest which are positive and negative and so on. But they're all things that humans decide. They're all tools of management for ecosystems that humans decide to use. And then we've got, which relates, it's why there's the dashed line around community dynamics and around living organisms, that there's different ways that we will use living organisms when it comes to managing ecosystems. Now that might mean, holistic management is often utilised by people who are graziers, but one of the things that people like me and others have been doing is trying to expand the reach of this quite profound methodology out into other agroecological modes of production as well. So you're not just looking at animals from the perspective of grazing animals and so on, but you're also looking at, how I look at this, if you're an orchardist or a row crop producer or a vegetable producer and so on, you may not have any livestock. So how does animal impact and grazing relate when you're looking at tools for ecosystem management? Well, you may be looking at this through the different way. You might be looking more at microbiology and other species that you may well be managing as living organisms in this system, and so on. The most important thing is that you understand it and that you analyze it and you monitor it. So, and then money and labor, which is also, well, all species labor. They go to work to obtain their nourishment and use the energy to reproduce and so on, and just live in the world. So that's something that's not specific to humans, but humans are the only ones who use money. So so that's another thing that we apply to ecosystems, and we'll all have different levels of that as well. A lot of us will imagine what we could do if we had more labor or we had more money, and we've got to understand what we've got so that we can develop strategies about how we're going to move forward. All right, so actions and decision making. We're looking at all of the different objectives that we have, goals, tactics, strategies, understanding the difference between tactics and strategies, something that often a lot of people won't, and it's certainly useful to look at some of the different texts that are out there around that, or just have discussions around that. Different policies, so the policies that we discussed earlier that frame a lot of what we can and can't do, and then what we might say, or what is put here, which I think is good, are customary selection criteria. So the orthodox selection criteria when it comes to decision making, which is to say that most people will make decisions where they look at past experience, where they'll take expert advice, and where they undertake research, and research which, by definition, in terms of the orthodox scientific position, which is not holistic, it's usually very narrow in itself, which is not a criticism, it's just a reality that a lot because of the increased definition and resolution of disciplines across the board, but particularly in scientific disciplines, a lot of research is narrow, relatively narrow as a result. So whatever the case, that's what it is, and that's what a lot of people will take will make decisions from. So yeah, so the what used to be called testing questions or decision-making questions within Savory now are called context checks. So these are checks. So the way it works as a system, as it were, is you develop your holistic context. Your holistic context effectively becomes your constitution, both for yourself and for the organisation or enterprise that you're within. So once you develop that, then they're the sorts of you will bounce decisions against that context, as well as against the problem at hand. But you'll always come back to your context to be you might say the final arbiter of this. Now, some people, there's a lot of different ways that people will do the context checks. Some will do them where they'll appoint some sort of score. So a common question that I put forward is, do I need another tractor? It's a or do I need a tractor for, and it's funny because I like to raise this one because, especially for a lot of men, I find they define themselves by the jacket that they wear and the branding it might have, or the cap that they wear and the branding that they might have. And that branding is either their own or it's of a piece of machinery that they have, which they sort of are part of that tribe now. And I always find that really entertaining to watch, and no more so than in rural communities where, people wear green hats or they wear red hats, and it's anyway, it's fun. So so that frame is that question of, do I need a tractor? You may well put you might put the cause and effect, weak link, marginal reaction into some sort of table, and then appoint a relative weighting, so algorithm, to each one of those questions in terms of what you perceive as their tier of importance. So you might put 1, 2, 3, but then for others you might go, well, this one here, like sustainability, from our perspective, sustainability is more important. Like some of you will be, if you look at your holistic context, sustainability will be in there, but it may not be the be all and end all to you. For some of you, it'll be financial outcomes will be super important from your perspective as far as your holistic context is concerned, and that's completely up to you. If you feel that financial management and financial security and all of that are perhaps of a higher tier of concern to you than sustainability sort of type questions, which are related, of course, then when it comes to the weighting that you will put on marginal reaction, gross profit analysis, and energy, money, source and use questions, there might be there may be a higher weighting on those questions than, say, there would be with sustainability. And on it goes. Some of you might be incredibly intuitive, and your sense of intuition is something that you really place highly as a part of your decision making. Some of you might be psychic. I don't know, you'll feel that you're psychic. If that's the way you are, well, then that's how you frame yourself personally. Well, then that's going to take a different tier of importance, and on it goes, right? Everything in between. So when it comes to buying that tractor, well, if you're a psychic and you're deciding to buy the tractor and you're following these this context checks, well, then the way you run through this will be differently to whether you're a put it this way, a hard-nosed accountant type for whom that's really important. But then there'll be others in between who go, gee, I'm really concerned about I'm a big E environmentalist. Well, you'll feel differently again. But you will go through this process, and will you come out with the same outcome? I don't know, but at least you will have asked yourself a very rounded, holistic set of questions. So, what is this tractor doing? Why do I need it? Is it fixing the cause and the effect? Well, the first place to start that question is, what is the cause and what are the effects that we're trying to realize? And even that discussion in itself will help us to expand heavily on the determination, the decision. What weak links do we have? Social, biological, financial, that we're seeking to remedy by the decision to buy a tractor. Or the decision, you might say, I want to buy a yeoman's plough, a keyline plough, or I want to do this, or, you know, etc. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different decisions you can apply here. Are they fixing weak links? Well, you have to identify what the weak links are before you can actually then determine whether a tractor is going to fix those weak links, or is it going to actually make them worse? It might be that you have some financial weak links that going into buying, you know, using some inheritance funds, or the decision on whether you lease a tractor or whether you borrow money to directly to get it to a higher purchase loan or whatever, a personal loan or business loan. Each of those will have a different impact on your financial weak links and so on. So that'll help you going through that process to maybe determine which way that you will finance this, as it will when you come to energy, money, source and use, where you're looking about, if I use this tractor, am I just using the same? Is this having me do the same thing over and over and over again, right? A keyline plough is a good example. What's the purpose of keyline ploughing? Well, it's got a purpose of taking out the compaction immediately on a site and increasing water infiltration. Right? What's the cause of that? Well, the cause of that is our management or others' management prior to has caused those environmental conditions or those soil conditions to exist. And so you can opt for taking a slower route where you use cover crops, or you just use plant succession to help you undermine that compaction and poor infiltration, or you can be quite aggressive and use some diesel and iron and get rid of it straight away. But am I going to use it year after year? Well, if you're using it year after year, then that would suggest that your management practices that are intervening the use of this technology are actually not going so well. So there's those sorts of things which will probably start to pop up for you in discussions as you go through this, whether it's for a tractor or an implement or whatever else it might be. Marginal reaction. People will say that that's, you're looking at the best bang for your buck. Is this the best thing that you can spend your money on? And that's often a hard question to ask, and someone that I've seen many people get a little bit emotional about from time to time. But because they get emotional, because this is often a time when you put it through that lens of consideration, or you put it through the following one where you're doing gross profit analysis and the tractor fails miserably. That's why a lot of people use contractors, for example, because that's why some people in town don't own a car anymore, because they've actually sat down and done the numbers and they've realized that it doesn't pencil out to have a car. It just doesn't work. So that's why there's car hire, car share places around, because it just doesn't pencil out. But people, being people, will say, no, I want to have my own car at my own time. I can afford it, right? And of course, we've got way more cars than we probably actually need, and so on. Just like we've probably got way more tractors than we probably need, and so on, because our rank individualism causes us to make decisions which aren't necessarily the best and the most holistically thought through. They're not the most responsible, but that's up to you. At least you've gone through and asked. And then the sustainability question is, well, is this decision sustainable? Will it carry on? Does it pass our own assessment of what sustainable is, which you have to ask? And then finally, the gut feel question of, how does this, after we've gone through all of this, we've been quite linear about it, and we've expanded on it. We've gone and looked at all of these different terms of feasibility. And now we go, okay, well, how do we actually feel about it? How does our reptilian brain feel about it, and so on? How does our psychic brain feel about it? And off we go from there. And then we've got management guidelines. So time is something that we apply, and there's been some really good discussions, particularly led by Fausto Bermudez in the workplace about ultra high density grazing, for example, and that's engaged people from all over the world in different climate types into that discussion. So if you haven't had a look at that, that's a really good one in the soils layer. So, you know, and then that relates to stock density and herding effect. So how are we working these things together? So time and time management is something that we do. How much time do we have to spend at these boxes? How much time do we appropriate livestock or to particular phases? And then that goes to how long we crop an area for, how long and what time of the year do we burn? And then finally, the population management question in terms of what sort of populations are most suited and sustainable for any given area, and do they sustain us financially, and so on. Procedures and processes, well, Savory sort of expanded on this a bit more than how it was originally. So originally in the holistic management suite of management procedures and processes, there was financial planning, land planning, and planned grazing. That has expanded somewhat into policy development and research orientation. Those sorts of things really started to come about 10 years ago that I started to see, and off it went from there. There's quite a strong discussion going on around holistic land planning. In fact, I've just been, because I'm doing a bit of research for, I'm doing some work with Alan Savory and Jodie Butterfield on land planning at the moment. And so I'm rereading this chapter of the other book on holistic management, which is the handbook. And this is really, this is really where we get to these procedures and processes. So this smaller book is sort of an entree to the whole and all of what we've got here on this framework. This one here, which is a bigger format book, delves into the financial planning, land planning, and so on. So, but it says here in this latest edition, which is the third edition as well, because holistic land planning is basically a procedure for planning the layout of infrastructure for livestock grazing, the term land planning is something of a misnomer. This is what most ranchers have preferred to call it, so we've kept the name. But that's not to say that that's going to stay that way, as per the discussions that I'm having. Because one of the things that's happened in holistic management over the last decade in particular, or 15 years, and in some part thanks to people like myself in expanding the different types of agroecological production systems that are using this practice, is that it's not just grazers anymore. It's also orchardists. It's people who are doing cropping. It's all of the different systems, and so that then makes the land planning frameworks that they've got in here, which are really, really for grazing, and I have to say mostly for quite large operations, not very useful at all. And so that's part of our discussion. Now, the other part to this is the feedback loop, and this is where we're looking at, to start with, planning. And this is one of the most powerful things that were for me when I came into looking at this moving and adopting, well, this framework and adopting a lot of its principles, was this assumption of that you're wrong. And it was actually that started the end of the line as far as my use of master planning. And that really happened from about, I'm going to say about 2006-07. after that, I really started to question the value of master planning. So master planning is the concept of where you will form a team or yourself, you will get a land plan, whatever you call it, business plan, however you want to frame it all together, and you'll frame out the future on that text, on that plan. So you'll plan where all your fences are going to go, you'll plan where all of your water infrastructure is going to go, you'll plan all of the layers, every one of them, and you'll have this beautiful plan which is all completed, and that'll be put on your wall, and that'll be the aspiration. That'll be the visualization of where you want to go. And I've seen that time and time again across the disciplines, whether it's, whether it's in architecture, whether it's in landscape architecture, whether it's in development aid work and so on, whether it's in permaculture, soil conservation, etc., and farm planning proper. So there's a lot of people who are coming up with that whole frame, but what it doesn't understand is, and doesn't necessarily reflect, is complexity. And that, when we're dealing with complexity, not only, so the triggers for complexity are manifold. We've got social complexity, we've got biological complexity, and we've got financial complexity. So within social, we've got the relationships with ourselves, but then we've also got legal complexity. And then we've got things like pandemics that come in and interrupt shit and so on. Then we've got biological complexity. You put something in and then that becomes a vector or encourages something else to come in which you didn't predict. And then you've got financial complexity, which is often related to social and biological complexity in terms of things don't go as well, market conditions change, and so on and so forth. So all of that behooves me to try and take a bit more of a strategic, incremental, pragmatic approach to planning and doing things which, and having pathways for planning which are a bit more reliable, you might say, in terms of their risk management, because I've done it myself, and I've always been a very cautious designer myself, but then I've seen others or planner myself, and so I don't have the kind of errors in place that a lot of other people have had. I've done a lot of systems where I've, someone's hired me to do a plan, and then I've gone and basically over 2 or 3 years put that plan in place. And I've generally, because of my conservatism, been able to get it reasonably right. But I'm a professional doing this all the time, so I should get it pretty well right all the time. But then there's everyone else out there who's not, this is their one go, right? They don't have and they're doing it themselves. They don't have the luxury of being able to have all of these projects out there to feed back on them. So no, it's not frozen, Eric. I'm going through the holistic management framework. So yeah, it's not frozen, mate. Thanks for asking that. So sorry about that. I just lost my train of thought. But anyway, it's important to realise that and I think this is a very important point, that you should assume that you are wrong with environmental decisions. That's really hard for humans to do, because there's a term called hubris, and that term is the opposite of humility, and a lot of people lack humility in decision making and in action, and so I think it's really important for us to have that. Some people say that humility leads to humus. All right, so planning whilst going ahead, whilst not suffering inertia, is, and as on the other frame it says, plan assuming that there'll be change, which I think is another way of putting it, which is good. Then monitoring what you do, and Graham Hand puts this really well. He often talks about safe to fail trials, or safe to safe to fail areas. So you will do little trials, which will, so you've got your main stuff that you're going, which is fairly safe and very low risk, but then there might be the things that your innovation genie is sort of pushing you to do, or that you're hearing about as something to integrate as a new set of practices, and so on. Don't do that across the board. Just do it on your 5%. Do it in your 1% of area, monitor that, and then control and then replan to incorporate what you've learned, because it may be something that's really powerful and something that can be that you incorporate, and so on. All right, so I've appropriated quite a significant amount of time to that because it is important, and I'd love for you to expand on that. You've probably at the same time to listening to me, CPAg, had an opportunity to have a look at the other side, at the holistic management side, and I'll just quickly go through that. So they've broken that up into 6 sets of practices with the principles overlying that, which are 2 of Alan Savory's insights, or one of his insights, I should say, which is that nature functions in wholes and that you should understand your environment, right? So that's an overarching principle. Then you're looking at your inventory instead of your whole under management. So that's your management team, and that's your assets. So the people and your assets. So considering that management team are decision makers, resource base and money are assets, right? Practice 2, purpose. So your mission statement. A lot of people don't, well, people within this space don't like to use the term mission statement because that sort of denotes what you have at the start of a business plan, which, you know, a mission statement, missions don't necessarily have purpose. And I know this is semantics, but I personally prefer a statement of purpose. What was it on Kill Bill? State your purpose. Holistic goal, as opposed to holistic context. This was a big change when Savory went over to, or created Savory Institute. They looked at the context. I think that context is a better word to use, because goals are often things that move, as do context. But I don't know, a goal just seems to me to be not necessarily reflective of context. So they're very different words, and words are powerful. So when we get to this, the quality of life and values are listed, behaviours and systems. So that's a bit different, although there's as you'll see, there's behaviours and systems embedded in the future resource of Savory's, and then vision. So what's your vision? So again, embedded in the future resource base. Ecosystem processes, no change there, pretty well. Biological community instead of community dynamics. I don't like that completely, because when I look at community dynamics, I'm also looking at the human ecology, the social ecology dynamics that are occurring within an ecosystem, because they're so powerful as well. But, you know, that's up to you. You might just cut it to that. Practice 4, ecosystem management tools. So again, very similar, not much variation, if none at all, it would seem. No. Practice 5, planning and monitoring processes. So pretty well the same as what you've got below there. On Savory's, financial, land, marketing and business planning. So that's as an addition to financial planning. And that's cool, because financially they are different, and I think that's valid. Good to have the option: crop planning, grazing planning, and monitoring. So there's no monitoring in the Savory one, because monitoring is generally as part of the feedback loop anyway. Testing questions, so different words, or different words generally, which describe the same thing. So root cause as opposed to effect. I think it's useful to, Jill, it's the same. If you're saying we're stuck on slide 5, it's because we're actually looking, I'll just say this again to be clear, unless you've just come in, that we're actually looking at the comparison between the holistic management frameworks of both the Savory Institute and Holistic Management International. So I've been going through these in some detail. No worries, thank you. So root cause, as opposed, I think it's useful to look at the effect as well as the cause, because you've got to then see it helps you with be better at taking responsibility. I think that's the way I frame it. You know, looking at causes as opposed to just looking at effects is much more responsible. Though that said, it helps to look at effects too. So just looking at causes is not what we need. Weak links, right? Well, it helps to, I think, to have them defined, because some people, unless they look at the fact that there are social biological weak links, wouldn't know them. So it's better that it's defined. Comparing options, which is marginal reaction. I don't know, that's a bit wishy-washy to me, so I like the marginal reaction thing. Gross profit analysis. Input analysis is a bit of a difference to energy, money, source and use. But again, not bad, and I probably would incorporate input over here, but I do prefer the other one. Vision analysis is an interesting one. I've got to expand on my knowledge of what that means. It's curious that there's no sustainability check in there, and there's gut check instead of gut feel. And then we get to management, then we get to the feedback loop, which is more or less the same. Although in this case, it's plan, implement, monitor, control. So the planning, I suppose if it's coming back to a plan, well, that's implicit that you are going to replan. So anyway, maybe a bit of semantic. If anyone's got any questions, please put them forward. So I'll just go forward now to looking at a couple of, this is from the from this smaller book here, the text, the Holistic Management Common Sense Revolution to Restoring Our Environment. There's a couple of examples of holistic contexts that have been created in here, which I think are really useful. So this is for an agency, and like says, like most government agencies or agencies, this one was formed for a specific purpose that it is obligated to meet. So you have as any agency has a stated remit that the government policy has determined its formation to be and about. So that's all clear. But then within that, and this is the role of any boards of management or CEOs and the executive, as it were, would be to further frame how those policy objectives are going to be outlined, and in this case, use the full weight of the organisation, or as much of it, to be on board with that and to help form that, which is a really big task, as anyone who's done this sort of work would understand. So the purpose is to ensure that this forest is managed sustainably and for the benefit of the nation. Right, that's pretty straightforward. Quality of life, on it goes, to be proud of our work, to live meaningful lives, to look at expanding learning, and to use the talents that we have and so on, and that they're acknowledged and utilised. To share what we do with our families and people, to manage this forest so that it has excellent financial returns and an even greater return in biological capital. And then in terms of the future resource base, how that's going to be expressed both in the future, through people and through land. So there's, streams will flow perennially and clear and be healthy enough to drink from. I mean, that's a really powerful statement to make. So is the holistic, this is from Daniel Parahensel, thanks Daniel, is this holistic policy development component to the Savory Institute a course training similar to the financial planning course? I don't know. I haven't seen it, as I think I mentioned earlier. I've only peripherally looked at that, but that might be a question that we can frame in the climate Leah, Daniel, and tag someone like, well, I'll be tagging people like Tony and Andrea Marmberg, Sheila Cook, and a few other of the holistic management professionals that we have who work both with Savory and also with HMI. So yeah, maybe we can have a look at that in the questions on the workplace. If that's okay. Thank you. Oops. No worries, mate. Gracias. All right, now next, a holistic context created by a middle-aged couple who effectively live in town, it would seem. And so there's some of that, and I'll let you go through that. But, things like at this stage of our life, it's really important to have robust health and physical stamina and to be financially secure, to live simply and consume sparingly, to spend time with our kids, grandkids, and so on. And as people, we want to reflect on how we are as people now and how we might have some improvement. And then for whatever purpose, when we make purchasing decisions or investment decisions, etc., well, then how's that going to be reflected in land management outcomes? So just because you may not live on a farm or have a direct professional day-to-day engagement with an agroecological production system doesn't mean that you're not an influencer. You can influence in all sorts of ways, starting with how you purchase and what you purchase for your own nourishment is a very powerful thing. And that may be reflected here that may be started, the determination of which will be started with by forming some sort of context. I did a holistic management agrarians program with Helen Lewis, and Helen had a whole cluster of people up her way who she'd been working with for some time. They get together and sort of nut out. There's about 10 or 15 families up in southeastern Queensland in the Warwick region, and Warwick, Toowoomba, Dalby sort of quarter there, and they would get together every few months socially and at the same time professionally and nut out their holistic management plans and just have some support with each other and so on as they were working through living in the world, which was really great. So I got to be exposed to that group, and some of them had already built some of their holistic context. And so this is a really good example. Is people I've known for a long time. So looking at who are the decision makers. So in their case, I've just put, wife and husband, I've anonymized this. Secondary, mum and dad, tertiary, daughter and son. It's important to realise, just on the context of decision makers, that these may well change. Like once upon a time, mum and dad might have been primary. In succession, that's changed out. So husband and wife, and then daughter and son, maybe they will come along and change in their role to being secondary at some stage and then primary. So that's part of the dynamics of the social ecologies and decision making that we have over time, the hierarchy of it all. That's why it's important to put it out there and so we understand where we're at. We're doing that with our kids. Our kids are becoming much stronger in the decision making, the hierarchy of decision making than what they were obviously 10 years ago. And in 10 years hence, I'll be in my 60s, and 20 years I'll be in my 70s, and so on. So the role of our children will be they'll be in their 30s and 40s and so they'll if as we're all involved with each other, their role will change as decision makers. That's important to acknowledge. A lot of people it might seem completely bloody obvious, but it is so common that when I come up in talking with people, that this sort of stuff just hasn't been considered. And one of the worst times in people's lives are at the point of succession, when people die and assets of significant value and pride and so on get transferred, and it doesn't go very well. And that's largely a function of people not getting their shit together on this level, which is why I harp on about it. It's a really, really hurtful, horrible time for a lot of people. So, and it doesn't need to be. So changes in cultural practice, like such as this, I think are really, really important to us avoiding that kind of pain and hurt. And the other part about this, just to make a clear point, is that what generally loses apart from people in this is land. Because often what happens, too often what happens, and this happens everywhere, is that because of these succession outcomes, it is the land management that suffers. And for me, given my context, I just can't stand that happening. That all of the good work that people may have done in land management over time gets neglected or actually gets exploited so as to be able to cover people's financial asses. So they'll exploit the work that's done before, that's been of really high quality, in order to be able to get there, because they've had such bad succession outcomes that they're having to use the natural capital that's been built up in a land base to basically survive. And it's just a horrible thing to see happen, but it happens way too often. So, understanding the resource base, in this case, looking at people, looking at assets, and they've put all of that down, and then looking at different income generators in terms of potential capital as well. So there's different ways, and in case of Helen, this is how she's framed her questions. And then the quality of life statement, which is, the sort of rules of the family, but then the rules of engagement, which then impact the kind of quality of life that we want to lead. And then in case, and this is why I don't mind this forms of production, I like the fact that I've always liked the concept of forms of production being completely linked to, which is how it used to work, and I think should still work, the forms of production being linked to the quality of life outcomes that we've put out there. So quality of life outcomes, it's like, in the frame of this world that we live in, we don't have a free lunch. So if you want to live in a beautiful, healthy, diverse, and productive environment, well, that has to be paid for, right? You can't just have healthy, happy, conscientious, and confident children without there being a form of production which actually supports that possibility. That's just the reality. So that's why I like having forms of production which actually reflect on that. And so this is what we want in terms of quality of life. This is what's going to pay for it. This is how we're going to work. These are the things that we will do to actually make that work. That's how I frame it anyway. And then we look at the future resource base, which is, you might say, quite current from a Savory Institute perspective. And that's where seen to and known to be our community, what we want our community to look like, what we want our land to look like, what our home to look like, and our future, our equipment and infrastructure to look like. So these are the sorts of things. Now, like I've said, a lot of people who have been involved in the REX program and have done this work have then gone and put it on their fridge, or they put it in their office, or they put it somewhere. I've even heard some people have put it on their toilet, the back of their toilet door, which I think is interesting. And that then has been a compass, I suppose, for people to keep this a bit more front of mind, but without being weird and culty about it. It's not that. It's just that, these are important things for a lot of people, and they may be for you in framing the transitions that you will have ahead of you, and framing the rules of your game, as I put it. It's also interesting that when people, if you have that on your, a lot of people have dream boards and this, that, and the other that they'll have in their house, on their fridge, or wherever. And they have that, and that's all nice. but they're not necessarily that articulate, or they just talk about, oh, I want this farm, or I want that pool, or, you know, whatever it is that they've got as far as a dream board, some sort of creative visualization pathway that they've gone down. And that creates a bit of, you know, friends come around for a few drinks or a dinner party or just a family gathering, and people say, oh, you haven't got that yet, have you? And all that sort of thing. I think this is a lot more, there's a lot more depth to this, obviously. And so having something like this put out there, put on your website, or however you choose to express it, if you choose to put it out there, creates a real line in the sand as far as your self-determination of who you are. And so that when people come across you, then they look at that and they go, gee, I didn't really know, like they didn't know you up to this point. They didn't really know that, oh, that's actually really important to you. That's why you are organic, right? Because a lot of people out there don't know why you're that weird organic person. They go, oh, right, I get it now, right? And so that, in a sense, is part of the leadership position that you may well wish to take in your community or within your networks, by putting some of this stuff out there to give a little. And that's one thing that I've learned, particularly, prior to, but one thing that I've seen a lot of people do through the pandemic period is that a lot of people are putting out there a lot of their laundry. They're putting out there a lot of, let's say, searching for empathy from others, but searching for an understanding. I've seen that. I went to a hospitality industry dinner last year, and they had a food writer come up from Melbourne, and she said something that we'd already been doing, which was we've been having a conversation with our guests, both through social media and otherwise, about why we make the decisions that we do within this restaurant cafe. And she said, well, and I was listening to her, and she said, it's been really interesting. A lot of people have actually gone to the trouble of, or take the unprecedented step as restaurateurs, cafe owners, hospitality owners, of explaining to their customers why their costs are what they are. Whereas before, that was all completely closed, commercial in confidence information. But now, as we're in this sort of acute moment, in a space where we have social media, ubiquitous social media, which allows us to expose ourselves better than we ever have before, or worse than we ever have before in some cases, that we can bring people into our tent and not have to go and do empathy training, but go and just say to people, this is where we're at, so that you understand our context better and you understand what we're going through. We want to understand what you're going through too, right? Because, like they keep saying, we're all in this together. Well, if we're all in this together, then let's understand what we're all going through and what our respective contexts are, so that maybe we can have a bit better understanding of where each individual and collection of people are at. All right, that's pretty well what I've got. Apart from, in terms of presentation, I did want to just go through. I've got two of these in the. I'll just go to here. So where we drive. If anyone's got any questions, please fire away, because we've still got a bit of time left. Not much, actually. Sorry. No, wrong one. Go back to here. Sorry, I should have had this open before. So in your participant folders folder, and I think a few of you might have already done this, and I won't go and pick on anyone straight up, but down the bottom, the way you've got the Agrarians platform checklist. Make a copy of that, as we've shown, and you've also got this one here. It's kind of, I've morphed these so they're pretty well the same now. It was that they were separate sheets, but I've got pretty well all of this in here. So the necessity for you to go and use this one as such, this has a little bit more explanation in it. But if you want to keep it all in one, then just use this now, because all of the same questions are there. So if you want to, if you haven't already, have a bit of a crack at that, and ask any questions about. Oh, excuse me, didn't get to the mute button in time. Sorry about that. But yeah, if you've got any questions about that, then let's go. So Mick, might just get Mick on the call here. Hey Mick, asked to unmute. Sorry, Mick, I was just had to mute myself so you didn't have to listen to all of that.
That's all right.
How are you today?
Yeah, well, thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
As we were talking through that, we saw you mentioning fire in the holistic management stuff. I wondered if you had any thoughts on references for fire as a resource to manage vegetation. There's certainly lots of discussion around that in WA at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Everywhere. There's lots of discussion in Europe and the western states of the United States and Canada as well. Look, it's an interesting one. I've had a bit of contention with a lot of holistic management people about this topic because, as you've probably seen as well, Mick, there's a lot of people who really don't like the use of fire as a tool. And I've said to people within holistic management, well, why do you have it in your management guidelines or ecosystem management guide tools and management guidelines if it's not something that we can use? Because it's seen to be that it's almost a failure of land management if you have to, it's a failure of the use of other tools seen to be superior to fire. Yes, so I don't know if I'm making sense, but a lot of people just look at it as being, if you're using fire, well, then you're a failure, right? There's a bit of that.
Yeah, so, I suppose I see it being used at different scales.
Sure.
And as you change scale, you often change the resource input. So smaller fire means higher input, but maybe not immediate output from that. But on the long term, it would appear from First Nations use of fire that you can use it for a long-term benefit at a fine scale and avoid risk of having large-scale fire impacting on your vegetation or your property.
Yep. Yeah, I'm with you completely. I think that it is a tool. It's clear to me, at least, that Indigenous peoples, including Indigenous Europeans, and there's a whole range of discussions that are coming out about how fire, the tool of fire within European Indigenous peoples, of which many of us have in our lineage, was suppressed from use for various reasons in the last few thousand years. But we too were using burning, but Europeans have not been burners as such, whereas we've come into these new places and gone, and people are burning, and we've really looked down upon it. We've seen it as lacking sophistication or whatever. And then of course, we've got to the point where conflagrations have been of the scale that have brought your group to have this workshop within ours. So I think that there's certainly a role for fire. Again, it's something that one will, in the decision making of what tools to use, which is where we use the context checks. I think you put it in the mix. If you've got a vegetation, if you've got the question of how do I manage fire-prone vegetation, which has got how do I manage fuel loads which have built to a particular level of danger and risk concern? well, then the use of fire as a tool may be one of the tools that that you use. And then you come down from that and you go, all right, well, how are we going to use that tool at what time of the year and all of that? And that's where I think we're starting to, now that we've invited our Brown brothers and sisters into the tent at last, of decision making, that we're starting to look outside of the Euro box of the way we do things. I think you'd agree. So as you pointed out, so there's a lot of learning to be had there. And I think that Indigenous people in this country and others as well are relearning fire as well, because of the lack of initiation. You know, people have been denied or have been not exposed to initiation practices, the cultural initiation, which is often relates to particular management tools, as we would frame it. And so their understanding of how to use fire as, say, their ancestors would have used fire 300 years ago is quite different. And we're working on a landscape that's been borrowed by Europeans, by colonialists, for a few hundred years, and so irrecoverably changed as well. So it's a very big topic, that one. I mean, we find it all fully fascinating. And I'm sure you're grappling with it at the coalface, as it were, in a pretty hard way as you move forward to summer.
Yeah, well, with the rainfall we've had in the southwest, looking at the holistic approach to the farm plan, there's a likelihood there's going to be a lot more fuel on the property or on everyone's property. So managing that within a context of how to best get the value out of it, maybe from stockpilling, how to minimise risk, and how to learn from this year and prepare for future years is probably quite a topical thing that we'd like to explore. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, we've explored that a bit. I don't know if you've had a bit of a look at all, Mick. We've been trying to, as best we can, compare the options available. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, just get animals in, right? Well, it's not easy and necessarily practical for a lot of people to just get animals in. It seems like it's this all-round panacea for a whole range of different scenarios that we have to face, but it just doesn't work that easily. And furthermore, to go into state parks and public land areas with livestock, well, you don't want to open that door necessarily as far as picking fights, even though the outcomes may be quite reasonable. And then there's biomass management, which I've been involved with. I don't know if there's been any of that down in the southwest, of the concept of doing silviculture and silvicultural thinning and state or public land management and private land management, where you go in and mechanically manage vegetation and then pay for that by producing by burning that material to make energy. That has presented a whole range of different responses, most of which have been really, really negative and have been legislated out of practice, depending on the makeup of the parliament at that stage. So it's a really, really hard one, and so we find ourselves with public agencies in particular, and you know this is better than anyone, who have limited resources and so on, and so the kind of the use of fire as a tool for managing biomass and managing fuel loads has not been as well done as it possibly could be, which is what Indigenous people are saying clearly. So,
yeah, I think just to round that off, maybe using a holistic approach to see where the fuel is actually coming from, whether that be annual or perennial weeds in bushland or even on the farm. Woody acacias are super effective at growing fast, using nitrogen, creating biomass. So by controlling them, you can reduce your fire. risk, you can also, utilize that high nitrogen biomass in other ways. So there's certainly new ways to look at it, but how they come out of the wash, so to speak, I think that's probably some further discussion needed.
Yeah. Well, that's right. And each one, so if you're looking at a rank amount of woody or acacia growth that's emerged thanks to a nice wet summer and winter, then that has a different management approach to, say, if it was a bulk amount of African lovegrass that you're trying to deal with. They're kind of similar, but they're both responses. But what sort of management and how are you going to pay for it? That's often where we get to, isn't it? What's it going to result in? How much effort and energy and money do we have to put in to change this circumstance to one that actually is less risky and actually continues to pay for itself? Yeah, fun times. All right. Well, thanks for opening that lid.
Yeah, no worries.
And everything's good for you otherwise?
Yeah, pretty good. We've still got a bit of that weather lashing the southwest, but it's a really interesting time for that holistic approach to look at some of those extremes and to fall them into the future. We've had record rains. No doubt we will face some pretty challenging fire stuff in the future in terms of risk. And of course, the economics can flip at any point. So overall, pretty good.
Yeah, that's good. Well, what I do look forward to over the coming weeks and the year is working with, particularly given the frame of the Peel Harvey Catchment Council's involvement with this program and others, is particularly because you're working with a lot of private landholders, is how do you actually manage the biomass to best effect, but also what other systems, infrastructure do you put in place and where to mitigate the fire risk that comes around every year, regardless of how wet the season's been before. But like I say, this year is probably going to be a big one that people need to get organised on. And before the end of this program, because that's October and you probably want to have got onto things a bit earlier than that.
Yeah.
So if people, I'm just reaching out to people, if people want to front end some of those questions and concerns that they've got coming forward, so that they can look at what can you do now in terms of addressing the concerns you might have around fire management before it becomes the fire season, then feel free. We've actually just spent a lot of work on the fire front, as it were, in the workplace. So we can, we'd love to have that discussion. Well, thanks, Mick, and thanks to all your people for being involved. It's awesome.
It's a pleasure.
All right, good on you, mate. Thank you. All right, Jamie. Jamie, I'll just check in with you quickly, mate, just to get a clarification on what you're up to there. Oh, hi there, Jamie. Darren. How are you, mate?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks very much for all your time today. Just a real quick question. If we looked in those shared participant folders, we each are copying those files at the bottom, right? Make a copy file. Now, if we're looking at the whole under management and we look at the holistic context, could we submit that in a different format? Could that be like a mind map? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I think I mentioned that.
I think you touched on that, and I was just double checking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for me, look, just you're using this as a frame. How you put that out there is completely up to you. If I go back to the workplace and I look at, let's say, let's have a look at R10. So go R10 holistic context for, so this is this is way back. So if we look in here, which you all have access to, you have access to these groups as well. Then there are people who, is this a good example? Yeah, so this is, I can't remember, this is Andre, who was a Russian participant that we had, or a participant from Russia. He looked at this type of expression. So when we did that program, I think in the following week, just bear with me for a minute. I'll just get to, I think it was week 3. Let's try that. Might have been week 3. Yeah, holistic context development. This is it. Yeah. So we had a lot of people who looked at expressing their holistic. So Tyler Krawczyk, who you might know him from Hatchet and Seed, when he did his, he put his statement of purpose in the middle, quality of life statements around the outside, future, and so on. And that worked really well. And that's, yeah, there's certainly plenty of mind map apps out there that can help you with that. And that's one of the good things about the format that we've got, that we've got all of this legacy load of other people's work that you can go and look back on to help you with different ways of expressing the same thing.
Right on. Well, that's great, Darren. Just a quick question. I noticed with this course, we don't have, say, a group called R13. Let's see here. I guess there's not a specific group for this course. Is that correct?
Yeah, there are. So yeah, see R13. Can you see my screen now?
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen the R13s. Okay. Yeah. So if you look at I think this is what you're getting to. If you look at what's the specific group for us in this program, well, the way I classify you all, first of all, is as planner members, because planner members get access to all of this stuff, right? And that's part of that is the REX program. Part of it is a whole range of other stuff that, say, foundation or discovery members or just general members don't have access to. And so yeah, the REX and the planner membership are one in the same as far as I'm concerned. So if there's a group that addresses this course, then it's the planner members group. Okay. So when we want to, how would you recommend we share our work?
Well, there's 2 ways. One way, which I haven't exploited completely, which I'm thinking more and more of doing, is that you would form your own group, right? So any of you, if you go to here, you can, it should be here under groups, create group. Any of you, any member of this workplace can create a group, okay? And if you just click on create group, then what I would recommend is you would follow a similar protocol to here. So instead of putting it in here, there's no reason why you just couldn't put it in here, right? Where did I go? So you couldn't, if it were you, Jamie, you're in Canada, so I'd put Canada. You're in British Columbia, or
yes.
Yep, BC, and then I'd put Jamie Wallace, right? And that would be the name of that group. Now it's up to you as to whether you make that closed, open, or secret, right? So if it's closed, anyone can find the group and see who's in it, but they can't see the posts that are in it. If it's secret, only members can find the group, right? So, or if it's open, anyone can see anything, which is what you've got here. So any of you can see any of this at the moment, which, as I've explained, if you don't want that, then don't put it in here. Go and put it in your own Google Drive. So but you'll have to share that with me so that I can assess it if you want me to assess it. Okay. So that's another option for you. You can pop it in there, or you can pop it in here. Right. If you pop it in here, then just like any group, like I made one, our daughter Isabella and her partner are looking at buying a property, and they've asked for me to help with that. So yesterday I made a map for them, and I formed this secret group, which is just for that. Now you can post anything in there, and as long as you're a member of this group, you can tag people and all sorts of things and get access to it. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's great.
Yeah, so that's another option. Two, you creating something in here. So I'll click on the natural circle. They look like good people to click on. So they've got this. If this is you, you would right click on that, share, and then you would share that link with me in a private message or in the group, right? And say, hey, Darren, I've done this work. Can you have a look at it now, please? Right?
That's great. And that'd be sharing it in the planners group or as a
direct message, message. Yeah. However you wanted to do it. Yeah.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Darren.
No worries, mate. We're glad to have you back. All right. It's live done. Antonius. Okay. Might just get you to talk to me directly about this one, Antonius, just so I'm a bit clearer. You there, Antonius?
Yes.
Yeah, how are you, mate?
Good day. Oh, good. Yes. I was initially putting my folder, as in I created the folder for myself in, I think it was in a wrong participants folder. I think could have been the previous one.
Well, I think you've got it there. You've got Benella and
I just moved it there just 2 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was pretty excited when I saw other people in Benella as well, and I thought, wow, it's I would love to get to know them and see a possibility.
It's an interesting thing because clearly don't think of everything. But when I was thinking about this the other day, I thought, well, why aren't people more just, because just set your own group up. So instead of having it out there outside of the workplace platform, put it in here. Because if we all used the same convention, let's say that you wanted to find people, because I usually go Victoria, right? So if it's AU, Victoria, or Vic, right? Now, immediately when I put those two things up, then that's immediately going to say, oh, well, I've got two groups who are from Victoria here, right? Otherwise, if you go over into the drive, you actually have to scroll down and you have to know that what the proximity is, which is possibly likely, that you would know. But we don't have a map of everyone. So it's up to people to identify themselves. I might have to look at that. All right, so that's good.
Okay, so it's possible to make our own group and try to contact them somehow. I don't know, what's the best way to contact people here?
Well, the best way I would say is I would go to, you could go to places. I would either go to the home page or go to Agrarians Places. They're both default groups, which means that every person who's on the workplace is a member immediately. So if you put in a post and say, hey, calling out to all the folks in the Benalla area, then that may well get some interest. Just depends on how often people come in and look. Because I haven't created a, in the back end, as it were, I've only gone to, so if you look at the way I've added people, I've not, so I'll just use you, Karen, sorry to do that to you. But if I look at Karen's details, I've only gone to this level of place identification. So I've usually just gone state, province, county, and country, and that's it. Not place name.
If we say if we know the names of the people from around our proximity, like from looking at the folders, is it possible to search them up and send them a private message? And
yeah, of course. Yeah.
Is it possible to do that?
Yeah. I mean, you could type in Benalla as a starting point. Does that bring up anything? Yeah, we've got a few people. There's a few posts that have got something to do with Benalla in there. Or like I said, put the post in places or home and see if people bounce out.
Okay.
Then you can send them a message or create a post or whatever you want to do.
Okay. Is it a common culture here to do things together? Like I've been to many farms as a soil food web lab tech, and I have learned so much from just walking at other people's farm, and I
wouldn't say it's common, but people walk on each other's farms often virtually in here because we're a digital platform. So, but we certainly know that we've been able to organise or facilitate people coming together who weren't together before. Like, for example, I know that up that way, I think it was near Euroa, Benalla, that part of the world, we had someone who was doing some drone work and they needed more drone batteries. So there was someone else who was not that far away who said, oh, yeah, I've got the same drone. Here, you can borrow some of my batteries. That's just one example that comes to mind, right? So, there's lots of different ways that people interact here.
Yep. Wonderful. I'm looking forward to doing that one day.
All right. All right. Good on you, mate. All right.
All
Thanks
right.
for chiming in.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
All right,
Bye.
bye-bye. All right. And I think the last one I'll go to will be Alyssa. Okay. You there, Alyssa? Asked to unmute.
Hi, Darren.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. So you're asking about the fire management information in the knowledge library. I don't know that there is any, to be honest.
Okay. I was just following on from what Mick was saying, because I'm based in Perth and it's part of the PHCC group. And just from the fire risk management perspective, because recently we've gone through the development planning with the Shire and got the BAL assessment and things, and also got the people through to do the BAL a report and things like that. So there's certain standards that we have to comply to, but as Mick said before, we've had record rainfall, and now when we've done our mapping and we tag you into it, you'll see that we have on our farm, there's definitely some major risk factors, and we've had in early 2000 huge fire go through the Serpentine Jarrahdale area. So it just was, it sparked my interest straight away when you said, you've done quite a bit of work, and really by October, we want to have a lot of things in place before we finish this course. So
that's why I said when Mick was talking, I thought, we better probably front end some of this conversation. So we not our first rodeo on the fire front. So fortunately, there's a lot of stuff that so again, one of the things that you can do as a starting point is just type in fire. There's a lot of content that we've got already, whether it's just stuff like how people have set up their mobile firefighting units or fire prevention units. Different we've had people like Dan Tarasenko had a fire go through. He's down in the southeast of New South Wales, and he was in the big fire at the end of 2019. So really cataclysmic outcome there. So we've got a lot of people who've been deeply affected by fire and have spent a lot of time. We've had a lot of dialogue with quite openly about how we can deal with that. And then we've got people in California and all over the shop. So plus a lot of stuff. People like myself have contributed quite a bit of to this as well. So yeah, I'd invite you to go through and have a look at this type of work first.
Yes. And
then over the coming weeks, I don't care when, certainly open up the thread and say, and I'd even go so far as to maybe just get your Google Earth boundary.
Yes.
And just post it, or do something like this. Like you could just get here's a Google Earth thing at the moment, right? You could do something as simple as, all right, this is my farm. I'll draw a map around it. Let's just say it's this one here, right?
Yep.
And do a few contexts. Like you can see here, this little farm, it's got a fair bit of eucalyptus bush around it, right? It's in a bit of a funnel. So you put your scenario together by saying, all right, well, here's this. Now you can export that as a Google Earth file, or what you can do is just like with the Mac or whatever, is just do a cut and paste of photos straight into a post and say, these are my scenarios. This is what it looks like on the ground from a few ground photos. This is what the map looks like. This is what our property looks like in close. This is the broader context, so people can see the sort of, the greater Bell influences, if you like. And let's talk about it. And
what category would we put that under?
I'd probably, look, you could probably go on water. Would be the good, because it's generally a water response. Well, it is. It's a hard one, fire, because it's across all of them. You could say it's a climate one. You could say it's a geography one in terms of how you're managing your geography. You could say it's soils and forest, and it's sort of like which one. So yeah, I generally put fire in the water one. That's where in the context of the Agrarians handbook, fire is as a topic is most dealt with in the buildings chapter and in the water chapter.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And just a quick question with regard to the groups. Do you know if there's a sort of West Australian group already established? We just put West Australian in, or
no, I don't believe that we do have one. On Facebook, if you want to step out of the platform for a moment, actually I'll go to just Facebook period. There was a group that was formed after some workshops that we did, I'm going to say in about 2009 or so. So I think it's called Regenerative Agriculture, Southwestern Australia. And it's got 800 members, and it's a really good little group. So you might want to look at going to that one. And having a look there. There's a lot of people across the board, and a few people who are in this Peel Harvey course are members of this group as well. So I'd go there, but we don't have one specifically. That's not to say it couldn't be formed. But there's already this one. So if you're Facebook, that's the go.
No worries. Thank you so much, Darren.
My pleasure.
It's overwhelming but exciting at the same time.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry about. I can't help that. Sometimes
that's okay.
You can see why people just want to stay in town, huh?
Yeah. No, thank you.
No, thank you. All right. Good on you. Thanks for being with us. Much. All right. Hooroo. All right. And I'll have this one last. I might just go to Amanda directly to get a bit more context. I'll make this the last question, seeing my bum's getting very sore. or num, I should say.
Oh, hi, Darren.
Hello,
yeah,
Amanda.
no, I
How
think
are you?
you really, I'm really well, thank you.
Good to hear.
I think you sort of answered it before. I just was trying to interpret a few comments from other people that have come on just asking questions about the group setup. And I think you've shown through the Google Drive how we can, I guess, share files with each other. And, you know, I'm just mindful that sometimes when you're going along on the same, at the same entry level with others, it's kind of nice to connect with people. So,
well, that's what we've tried to do as much as we can from the start with this program using these platforms is say, all right, well, you know, a lot of what we're doing is not necessarily sensitive information. And so if that's not the case, and you're doing it within the context of a course with that, then there's good reason to be able to support each other by having a bit more transparency, but understanding as well that some stuff you want to keep private too.
Cool. Thank you.
No worries. All right. Thank you. And thanks for being with us. All right. Well, that's probably enough for now. Thank you so much. I don't normally go this long on a webinar, maybe on a what do you call it? A Q&A, but it was great to have people's questions and expand outside of the reach of the topic as well. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much, everyone. And we'll look forward to what you've got coming ahead and at me and at each other. All right. And happy days.